The Alpha King cut Luna's hair for his mistress. By midnight, the entire empire trembled. I remember the exact moment my life split in two. It was not the morning Aldrich called me to his throne room and told me to kneel, or the night his mistress Seraphina walked through the palace doors wearing a gown the color of fresh blood and smiled at me across the great hall as though she already owned everything I stood in. It was not the first council session where I arrived to find my chair removed from the high table on the pretense of a seating arrangement revision. It was not even the morning I woke to find her maid at my chamber door with a silver pair of shears and a command written in the king's own hand. It was the moment I let them do it. That is the thing no one tells you about being a Luna. They speak of the bond as though it is armor, this sacred, unbreakable tether between wolf and mate that the moon goddess herself braids into your soul before you are even old enough to understand what you are carrying. They tell young girls that the Alpha King's bite means protection, devotion, belonging. They tell you the bond is an anchor, a compass, a living proof that the moon does not make errors. They do not tell you that a bond can be honored with one hand and desecrated with the other. They do not tell you that a man can be your fated mate and still look through you as though you are a window rather than a woman standing right in front of him, full of everything she ever gave him. My hair had been my mother's pride. Chestnut waves that fell past my waist, thick enough to braid twice over, the kind of hair that catches firelight and holds it. She used to sit behind me on summer evenings when the pack gathered on the south lawn and work her fingers through it slowly, humming the old songs, the ones that went back before written language, back to when wolves simply ran and called to each other across dark water and didn't need words for what mattered. She had a particular way of starting at the crown and working down in sections, patient and thorough, her hands knowing the weight and texture of it the way hands know something they have touched 1,000 times. She died when I was 12. Fever, fast and indifferent, the way fever is. I kept my hair long after that because it felt like keeping something of her alive in the world, some physical thread back to her hands, to the sound of her voice on summer evenings, to the way she had loved me in small and tangible and daily ways. 7 years inside the Northern Empire's palace, and I had never once cut it. Seraphina's maid held the shears. Seraphina herself stood in the doorway of my dressing chamber with her arms folded, wearing a morning dress that cost more than most pack families earned in a season, watching with the particular unhurried satisfaction of a woman who has already decided the outcome and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. The maid, young, careful, eyes carefully aimed at the floor, said quietly, "The king requests it, Luna." Not asks. Requests. The distinction was intentional. I looked at Seraphina. She tilted her chin up with the ease of someone delivering a verdict they have been holding for months. She did not speak. She did not need to. The victory was already on her face, already in the way she stood in the doorway of a room that was mine, wearing the expression of a woman who has been given the keys. I looked at the maid, at the shears catching the morning light, at all that chestnut length falling over my shoulder, my mother's hair alive in me for 7 more years than she was alive herself. I sat down in the chair. I let them cut it. Aldrich's maid held the shears. Seraphina stood in the doorway, watching. "The king requests it," the maid said quietly, not meeting my eyes. I looked at Seraphina. She tilted her chin up with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has already won and simply wants to watch you understand it. I sat down in the chair. I let them cut it. That was how it began, not with fire, not with rage, but with the quiet sound of shears and the soft fall of chestnut hair onto cold stone floor. That was where I buried the version of myself that waited and hoped and told herself that Aldrich would come around, that the bond would reassert itself, that the moon goddess did not make mistakes. She did not make mistakes, but she made him, and he had made his choice. I had come to the Northern Empire 7 years ago as the second daughter of the Silver Line Pack, a match brokered by my father's hunger for alliance with the North more than by any romantic notion either family had permitted themselves to hold. I was 19, old enough to understand what I was being sent to do, and young enough to be frightened of it without showing the fright. Aldrich was 26, broad-shouldered and dark-eyed, not yet the man history would call the Iron King, but already carrying that weight in his jaw, that particular still watchfulness that powerful wolves have when they are at rest, the potential for motion coiled just beneath the surface of every quiet moment. The bond hit us both the instant we stood in the same room. I know because I felt the precise moment his attention shifted. Across the crowded entry hall of the Northern Court, 40 people and a season's worth of formal ceremony between us, and still I felt the change in the air the way you feel a storm before it arrives. When I turned toward the source, it was to find him already looking at me with an expression that had nothing political in it, nothing rehearsed or calculated, just the raw and immediate recognition of a wolf who has found what he was looking for and knows it without needing to reason toward it. "Mine," his wolf said, across the hall, through the noise. I felt it echo inside my own chest like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting for a long time. He courted me properly. 3 months of measured, deliberate attention that expressed itself not in grand gestures but in specific ones. The correct book appearing on my writing desk the morning after I mentioned a passing interest in the old Southern pack histories. A particular herb broth brought to my chamber when I had a winter cold, exactly the kind my mother had made. A seat arranged at council briefings so that I could observe and learn the machinery of the empire I was now part of, without being made to feel ornamental about it. His eyes finding me in crowded rooms, not possessively but attentively, the way you look at someone you are actually paying attention to rather than simply claiming. He was not effusive with words. Words were not, I would learn, the place where Aldrich was most fluent. He expressed himself in attentiveness, in presence, in the small and daily acts of noticing that are more meaningful than declarations, because they require continued effort rather than a single moment of feeling. He held my hand on the walk back from our evening runs through the forest, not because it was expected, but because he wanted to, and he was not a man who did things he did not want to do. When he bit into my throat on our mating night, I thought the warmth that flooded through me was happiness. I thought I understood what I had bonded myself to. I thought I knew what kind of man he was. Looking back, with the clear, cold vision that only distance and grief can provide, I think that man was entirely real. I also think he became, over years of running an empire and absorbing its endless demands, someone who confused what he owed the throne with what he owed the person who had given him her life. The man I bonded with was still in there. He simply became very hard to find beneath the king. The cracks were invisible at first because I was determined not to look for them. Aldrich was a king before he was a husband, and the Northern Empire did not pause for sentiment. Council sessions, border disputes in the east, packed delegations from the outer territories requiring careful acknowledgement and the exhausting diplomacy of competing interests, trade negotiations, military assessments. The rolling machinery of governance that never stops, that feeds on attention the way fires feed on wood, that will consume every hour you give it and ask for more. I understood this. I did not expect to be his whole world. I had grown up watching my father balance pack leadership against personal life, and I knew the weight of responsibility for other people's safety and livelihood. I had not come north expecting a country cottage by the river. I had expected to be his partner in the difficulty, someone to think alongside, someone to come home to in the fullest sense of that phrase. The sheltering was where it began to go wrong. In the early years, he included me, asked my perspective on delegation disputes, walked me through the logic of eastern border positioning as though my understanding genuinely mattered to him, which it did. I could see it in the quality of his attention when I responded, in the way he turned my observations over in his mind before speaking. I felt real inside that marriage, present and purposeful and seen. Then the years accumulated, and the weight of the empire grew heavier, and somewhere in that weight he stopped including me and started protecting me from inclusion, which is the kind of thing a man tells himself is kindness when it is actually, beneath the surface, a slow retreat. It is easier to be alone with your difficulty than to be present with another person while you are struggling. He retreated into the kingship the way men retreat into work, and I was left outside a door that had once been open with no explanation of when it had closed or whether I was expected to knock. I tried. I want to say that plainly because it is true and because it matters. I tried to maintain the partnership. I inserted myself into council discussions where I had standing. I made conversation in the evenings about the things preoccupying him, even when he gave back answers that were half his attention. I suggested more than once that we take a week away from the palace, not for romance but simply for perspective, for the forest and the running and the talking that had worked so well in the beginning. He always had a reason it wasn't the right time. The reasons were always legitimate. The empire's needs are real, but there is always a reason when a person needs there to be one. Seraphina arrived in the 4th year of our mating, the daughter of the Eastern River Pack Lord, sent as part of a trade negotiation, and she was beautiful in the particular way that certain people are beautiful consciously, with intent, every gesture calibrated for effect. She looked at Aldrich the way I had stopped letting myself look at him, which is to say with open and undisguised want. She did not bother to hide it. She had calculated correctly that hiding it would make her less rather than more compelling. I noticed. Kale, Aldrich's beta, noticed. I could see it in the careful neutrality of his face whenever the three of them were in the same room. Elder Marin noticed from across the council chamber with her ancient and unsentimental eyes. The kitchen staff noticed. The whole palace noticed in the particular wordless way of large households that live in close proximity to power and learn to read its movements before they become public knowledge. What nobody did was say anything. That is the way of courts. You wait, you watch, you protect yourself by being the last person to speak. It happened gradually, which is always more corrosive than something sudden. Seraphina at council dinners. Seraphina included in the hunt. The king's personal guard extended to include her escort. Then the whispers, low as wind through dead grass, moving through the servants' corridors and the kitchens and up through the floors until they reached me in the form of sidelong looks from ladies-in-waiting and a new hesitancy in the way the staff said my name. Luna, with a pause before it that had not been there before, the pause of people recalibrating which person in the palace it is most important to align with. I confronted Aldrich in the 5th year. His study, fire burning low, the maps of the southern border between us, and I had practiced the words for weeks, but in the end I simply asked him flat out whether Seraphina was his lover. He looked at me with those dark eyes, and said nothing for long enough that the silence became its own answer. "The bond is still intact," he said at last. "You are still my Luna." "That is not what I asked you." "It is the only answer that matters to the stability of this empire." I left. I went to the eastern wing, to a room kept for visiting dignitaries, and I lay on my back in the dark and listened to the bond hum in my chest. That constant low ache of something being pulled in a direction it was never built to be pulled, and I thought, there it is then. He has chosen to keep both things, and he believes I will absorb it because the bond makes it impossible to simply leave. He was not entirely wrong about the bond, but he had miscalculated on one crucial point, the same point most powerful men miscalculate on eventually. He had assumed that endurance and acceptance were the same thing. The morning the maid brought the shears, it was Seraphina's 25th birthday. I learned this afterward from Lysa, my handmaid, who had overheard it in the kitchens while collecting my morning tea. Seraphina had made the request to Aldrich directly, in private, in the small hours before the palace woke, and he had written the order in his own hand. Luna's hair, freely given, to be braided into a ceremonial wreath for the birthday feast that evening. The wreath would be worn at the high table, in the great hall, before every pack elder, council member, senior lord and lady in residence. Not a private cruelty, a public declaration, dressed in the language of ceremony and beauty, which is exactly how the worst things are always dressed. The sound of shears through hair is very specific. I had never had occasion to notice it before. Thick and deliberate, each cut with a finality that only irreversible things carry. The way doors sound different when they are closing for the last time. The hair fell onto the cold stone floor in loose coils and lay there, and I watched it, and I felt something go very quiet inside me. Not cold, not furious. Quiet in the way that deep water is quiet, still at the surface, moving very fast in the dark below, down where no light reaches and sound doesn't carry. I sat in that chair not because I had no choice, but because I had not yet understood what choice looked like. I had spent years in the language of accommodation, of measured endurance, telling myself that the bond would reassert itself, that Aldrich would come back to himself, that patience was not the same as surrender. And in that chair, with the shears working through my mother's hair, I understood for the first time that I had been mistaken. Compliance never reads as sacrifice to a person who has stopped paying attention to you. It reads as permission. Lysa wept when she saw me afterward. She was 17, with a wolf still figuring out its shape, and she pressed both hands over her mouth, and her eyes filled immediately when she came through the door and found me sitting at the vanity staring at my own reflection. "Luna," she whispered. "Don't," I said, not unkindly. "Bring me a mirror, the good one." She brought it, the silver-backed one from the chest by the window, and she held it for me, and her hands were not entirely steady. I looked at myself for a long time. My hair fell just below my ears now, uneven at the ends where the shears had rushed the final cuts. I looked like a woman who had survived something, which was accurate. I also looked, and this was the part that settled into me and stayed, more like my mother than I ever had with long hair. There was a photograph she had kept, the only one from before she met my father, before the pack and the mating and the particular shape a life takes when it is built around other people's needs, in which she was perhaps 20 years old, standing at the edge of silver-lined territory with her arms loose at her sides and her face fully, uncomplicatedly her own. She looked in that photograph like a woman who understood what she was worth and was not asking anyone's permission to know it. I set down the mirror. "Lysa," I said, "I need you to carry a message to Commander Wen. Tell him I need to speak with him privately before the evening feast and to come through the chapel corridor. Tell no one else." She looked at me with those wet, alarmed eyes. "And I need the covenant texts from the library. The original transcription, the archivist will know which one, the pre-revision copy and the restricted cases. Tell him it is for my personal study and give him no further explanation." "Luna, are you?" "I am entirely composed," I said. "I need you to be the same. Can you do that for me?" She swallowed hard, nodded once. "Good girl," I said. "Go quickly and quietly and tell no one where you are going or why." Commander Wen had served the Northern Empire for 30 years under 2 kings. He was 62, built like someone who had once been very strong and had simply never stopped, with a soldier's deliberate economy of movement and a particular quality of watchfulness in his eyes that told you he had seen enough political weather to recognize patterns well before the rest of the court started reaching for their coats. He had survived 3 major power transitions intact, which meant he understood precisely which way the wind moved in this palace and exactly whose interests he was ultimately serving when he served the Empire. He served the Empire because he believed in what the Empire was supposed to be. That distinction, I had come to understand, was everything. He came to me in the Eastern Wing Chapel through the side passage, alone, as I had asked. He took one look at my hair the moment he stepped through the door. His expression didn't change. 30 years of military discipline. Nothing moved in his face, but something shifted behind his eyes. A rapid and careful reassessment. "Sit down, Commander," I said. He sat in the chair across from me, with the deliberate posture of a man who does not waste movement. "The original Covenant texts," I said. "Not the court revision. I've already had Lysa retrieve the pre-revision copy from the restricted library. I want to be certain I am reading the provisions correctly before I proceed." I watched his face. "Specifically the right of the moon's judgment." A pause, not reluctance assessment. "I know the provision," he said. "Then tell me what it requires." He was quiet for a moment in the way that careful men are quiet when they are deciding how much they already understand about what they are being asked to participate in. Outside the chapel windows, the afternoon light was going the pale gold of a winter afternoon in the last hour before it fails. "The right of the moon's judgment," he said at last, each word placed with deliberation, "requires 3 conditions under the original covenant. First, a documented public dishonor of the sacred mating bond. The original text defines public dishonor as an act that diminishes the Luna's status, dignity, or authority in a manner visible to the pack community. The operative word is visible. The dishonor must be witnessed. Second, formal invocation at moonrise in the presence of witnesses, declared in explicit covenant language. Third, a witness of senior military or council standing who affirms the legitimacy of the invocation before the elders." He paused. "Once invoked, the matter passes entirely to the council. The Alpha King is specifically prohibited from adjudicating his own case. The council's findings are binding on the throne." "And it has not been invoked in 200 years, I said. "No, because no Alpha King in 200 years was foolish enough to publicly humiliate his Luna before the assembled court of the Empire," I said. Wen looked at me for a long moment. Something in his expression changed, not sympathy exactly, because he was not a sentimental man but recognition. The particular quality of attention a soldier gives to a situation when it has just become more serious than he had previously calculated. "Serafina wears my hair tonight," I said, "braided into a ceremonial wreath, by order written in the king's own hand, as a birthday gift from the Alpha King to his mistress, worn at the high table in the great hall before every pack elder, every council member, every lord and lady currently resident in the Northern Empire's palace." I folded my hands in my lap. "My hair, cut from my head this morning without my consent, given as a crown to another woman in my own home." The chapel fire settled. The winter wind found a gap in the old stones and moved through the room. "Is that visible enough?" I said. Wen was quiet for a long time. "Luna," he said at last, with the particular careful weight of a man who is about to say yes to something large and wants to be certain the person he is saying it to understands what they are beginning. "I have watched this court for 30 years. I have watched Alpha Kings make decisions, and I have watched this empire absorb their consequences without comment, because that is what courts do." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, looking at me directly. "I will stand as your witness. But you need to understand what you are setting in motion. Once invoked, this cannot be uninvoked. The process is permanent. The political consequences extend to the outer territories, to the River Pack Lord, to every alliance this palace has built on the assumption that the king's position is unassailable. Whatever comes after that moment." "I know," I said. "Do you?" "I've been watching it come for 3 years," I said. "I am simply the last person in this palace to do something about it." I held his gaze. "Will you stand with me?" The wind outside shifted, carrying the first real cold of evening through the stone walls. "I will stand with you," he said. Lysa dressed me for the feast that evening with hands that were precise and careful and eyes that were not. Silver, my mating colors, the colors of the silver-lined pack, which I had not worn to a formal occasion in more than 2 years, because Aldrich had stopped asking me to wear them, and I had stopped insisting that I had the right to choose. Silver at my wrists and my throat, and the luna's circlet on my shortened hair. I had to have Lysa pin it differently, without the weight of long hair to anchor it. And she stepped back when it was placed and looked at me for a moment without speaking. "You look like a Luna," she said finally. "I am a Luna," I said. "Let's make certain everyone in that hall remembers it." The great hall was full when I entered, 40 tables, fire blazing in every sconce, 200 wolves of the Empire's inner court, and its visiting lords settled into the first comfortable warmth of the feast. The low roar of a room full of people eating and drinking and conducting the endless social business of a court that never pauses for anything. I came through the side entrance, and I took my seat at the high table before Aldrich arrived, which was a departure from protocol but not a violation of it, and nobody moved to correct me. Cale caught my eye from 3 seats down. His expression was careful and still, but there was something in the slight tightening of his jaw that told me he had already heard something, or sensed it, or simply possessed the instinct that good betas develop over years of reading rooms before anyone in them has spoken. Aldrich entered. The hall rose in the reflexive deference that 2 decades of a powerful king's presence had trained it to. He walked the length of the room without hurry, the gravity of authority so thoroughly internalized it required no performance, simply was, and he took his seat beside me, and in the motion of sitting he glanced at me and I saw the moment he registered my hair. He went very still for the span of a breath. Then his eyes moved away, to the herald, to the hall, the practiced avoidance he had perfected over years. But they came back. Once and then again, the way eyes return to something that is not sitting right. Seraphina was at the Lord's table to the right of the dais, positioned with the deliberate visibility of someone who had requested exactly that seat. She was wearing the wreath. My hair, braided into flowers and winter leaves, threaded through with red berries, sitting on her dark head as though it had been designed for her. When she caught me looking, she met my gaze with the even satisfaction of a woman who has already won and is simply watching the acknowledgement arrive. I let my gaze move on. I let the feast proceed, the wine, the first courses, the herald's welcome, the birthday toast. I let the hall settle further into itself, into the comfortable warmth and noise of a court that believes tonight is simply tonight. Then I stood. The silence came in waves, as it always does in large rooms when something unexpected happens, corner by corner, table by table, the conversation falling away until it reached the walls and there was nothing left but the fire and 200 people breathing very carefully. Aldrich looked at me, fully directly, for the first time in months, the practiced careful distance gone, something sharp and present in its place, something unguarded that I had not seen on his face in so long it looked almost foreign. I said what needed to be said in the plainest words I had. No preamble, no performance, no speech composed for the occasion. Under the original Pact Covenant, the foundational law of this empire, I invoke the right of the moon's judgment. My voice carried. The silence made carrying easy. I invoke it on grounds of public dishonor of the sacred mating bond. The Alpha King ordered my hair cut and gave it as a gift to another woman, to be worn as a crown in my own home, before the assembled court. This hall has witnessed it. Commander Wen stands as my formal witness. Wen rose from his chair at the senior officer's table, 62 years old, 30 years of service, upright and unambiguous, looking at the council elders with the expression of a man who has made a decision he intends to stand behind. The silence was the kind that presses on your eardrums, the kind that happens not before an explosion but before a reckoning, which is a different thing entirely and considerably more permanent. I sat down. Aldrich had not moved. He was looking at me with an expression I did not have a name for, not anger, not calculation, not the careful political management of his face that I had watched him maintain for years. Something beneath all of that, something raw and unsteady and almost unfamiliar. "Lyra," he said, "only my name." "The covenant is clear," I said. "You know what comes next." Lysa dressed me for the feast that evening with hands that were steady and eyes that were not. I wore silver, my mating colors, the colors of the Silver Line Pack, which I had not worn since the first year of our bonding when I had still believed they meant something to Aldrich. Silver gown, low at the throat to show the faded mark of his bite. My shortened hair she combed back simply, and at the last moment I took my Luna's circlet from its box and set it on my own head, which I had not done in months. Aldrich had stopped asking me to wear it. I had stopped reminding him that I should. "You look like a Luna," Lysa whispered. "I am a Luna," I said. "Let's go remind everyone." The great hall was full. 40 tables, fire in every sconce, the high windows letting in the last blue of the winter evening. I entered through the side doors and took my seat at the high table before Aldrich arrived, which was not protocol, but no one moved to correct me. Kale, Aldrich's beta, caught my eye from 3 seats down, and his brow tightened briefly, not hostility, something more complicated. He had always been careful around me. I had never fully known whose side he was on. Aldrich entered. The hall rose. He walked the length of it with the particular gravity of a man who has never once questioned whether rooms will rearrange themselves around him, and he took his seat beside me without looking at me directly, which was how things had been for months now, a careful avoidance, like orbiting a point neither of us would name. Seraphina was seated at the Lord's table to the right of the dais, positioned with deliberate visibility, and she was wearing the wreath. I looked at it once. My hair, braided into flowers and leaves and threaded with winter berries, sitting on her dark head like a crown. She met my eyes across the hall and smiled with the satisfaction of someone who believes they have already won the war. I looked back at Aldrich. He was watching the herald begin the welcome. His jaw was set. He did not look at Seraphina. He did not look at me. He looked at the middle distance, at the space between both of us, which was exactly where he had been living for the last 3 years. I waited. Let the feast begin. Let the wine come and the first courses arrive and the toasts be made. Let the hall settle into the particular warmth of a court feeding itself. Then I stood up. The hall did not go quiet immediately. It never does, not in a room of 200 wolves with food and wine already working. But table by table, corner by corner, the sound dropped. A Luna rising at the high table at a feast was unusual. A Luna rising with her circlet and her silver, and that particular quality of stillness in her spine was something else. Aldrich looked at me. For the first time in months, he really looked at me, sharp, present, something flickering behind his eyes that I could not read. I had not prepared a speech. I was not going to perform grief for the court. I said what needed to be said in the plainest words I had. Under the original Pact Covenant, the foundational law of this empire, I invoke the right of the moon's judgment. My voice carried. The hall had gone very still now, the hush spreading to the farthest table. I invoke it on grounds of public dishonor of the sacred mating bond. The Alpha King ordered my hair cut and gave it as a gift to another woman to be worn as a crown in my home before the assembled court. This has been witnessed by this hall. I paused. I call for council judgment. Commander Wen will stand as my witness. Wen rose from his seat without hesitation. 30 years of service, upright in his chair, looking directly at the council elders at the long table to the left of the dais. The silence was the kind that presses on your eardrums. Then it broke, not into uproar but into something worse, the low specific sound of 200 people recalibrating everything they thought they knew about tonight. I sat back down. Aldrich had not moved. He was looking at me now with an expression I had never seen on his face in 7 years, not anger, not calculation, something beneath those. Something raw and unguarded that he had not allowed into his features in so long he seemed almost surprised to find it there. "Lyra," he said quietly, "only my name." "The covenant is clear," I said. "You know what comes next." What came next was 3 days of council deliberation, and by tradition I remained in the eastern wing for the duration of it, separated from the proceedings, present only in the form of written testimony delivered on the first morning. The waiting had a particular quality to it, different from the waiting I had done for years inside the marriage. That waiting had been passive, a holding of breath, hoping something would change on its own. This waiting was active. I had done the thing. Now I waited for the world to respond to it. Lysa brought meals and news in careful fragments. The River Pack Lord had sent a formal delegation within hours of the invocation, demanding clarification of his daughter's standing. 2 of the 7 council elders were arguing for dismissal. The invocation was an archaic provision from a different political era, they said, not intended for the modern complexities of imperial governance. 4 elders were holding firm, led by Elder Marin, who had reportedly said in closed session that the original covenant's authority predated the current king's reign, predated his father's reign, predated every argument about political modernity, and could not be set aside because the circumstances were inconvenient for the people. The law was designed to constrain. The 7th elder, Old Draven, had spent 6 hours with the original texts before the second session, and had not spoken in open council since, which Lysa said the kitchen staff interpreted as significant. I read. I walked in the frozen chapel garden in the mornings, my boots crunching on the old gravel, my wolf running restless loops in the back of my mind. I did not weep. That part was done. I had made my weeping years ago, alone in rooms where it could not be used against me, and I was not going back there. On the second night, Kale came after midnight. He came without announcement, dismissed the guard's quiet objection with his beta's authority, and stood in the doorway of my chamber with his traveling cloak still on, and the look of a man who had not slept since the feast. He looked at me for a moment without speaking, and in that silence I could see him revising something, reassessing a calculation he had been running for a long time, and finding his answer had been wrong. "You knew about the covenant provision," he said. It was not quite an accusation and not quite admiration, something between them. "I've spent 7 years in this palace library," I said. I had very little else to do with my evenings, once they were no longer required for anything else. He absorbed this. He had the beta's habit of processing information fully before responding, never filling silence before he had something worth putting in it. I had always appreciated this about him, even in the years when I had not known whose side he was on. "He sent me," he said. "I assumed he would. He wants to know if there is any version of this where the process is withdrawn." "There is not." "He knows that," Kale said. "He told me he knows that. He asked anyway." He looked at me steadily, not advocating, just carrying the message. "He also asked me to tell you something specifically. His words, I am not editing them or adding to them." A pause. He said, "Tell her I know what I did. Tell her I cannot ask her to forgive it because I don't have the right to ask that yet. Tell her I am asking her to consider whether she will let me prove that I understand the difference between a kingdom and a marriage, that there is a difference and I know now what it is." I looked at Kale for a long time. He gave me nothing back but the message, exactly as it had been given to him, without interpolation or advocacy in either direction. He was a good beta in the original sense of the word, not an enforcer, not a political instrument, but a man who served the health of the whole rather than any particular agenda within it. "That is a very significant thing for a man to say," I said, "who 3 days ago could not find the consideration to ask his mate whether she consented to having her hair cut." "Yes," Kale said, "it is." I got up from my chair and crossed to the window. The courtyard below was dark and wet from recent rain, the torches in their brackets burning against the damp, the stones gleaming. The bond was in my chest, as it always was, but changed, somehow, from the constant bruised ache of recent years. Something more watchful, a wound not closed but no longer actively bleeding. "The council process goes forward," I said. Whatever they decide, I accept. If they require a public acknowledgement of dishonor from him, he gives it completely, without qualification or political framing, in his own voice before the assembled court. I paused. If they impose conditions on the continuation of the bond, he meets every one of them without negotiation. If they determine the bond cannot be repaired, I stopped for a moment, breathing through it. Then that is the council's determination to make, not mine alone. He will accept those terms, Cale said. I know he will, I said. That is not the interesting question. I turned from the window. The interesting question is whether, when there are no more political consequences at stake, when the empire has reached its verdict and moved on, he still chooses to show up as a person rather than a king. I looked at Cale. That question I cannot answer for him. He has to answer it himself. Can he come to you, Cale asked, himself, to say these things directly rather than through me? He can come, I said. Tell him to bring nothing with him. No speech, no strategy, no offering framed in terms of what is good for the empire. I am not interested in governance. I want to know if the man who walked me home through the forest 7 years ago still exists somewhere inside the king. And if he does, whether he can find his way back to himself long enough to sit in a room with me without performing anything. Cale was quiet for a moment. He'll come tomorrow evening, he said finally. I'll tell him what you said. Tell him the chapel, I said. He'll know why. Aldrich came the following evening. He came alone, without guard, and he knocked on the door of the Eastern Wing Chapel rather than the chamber where I was sleeping, as though he knew I would be there. Sitting with the covenant texts open on my lap, the candles burning low, the night settling into deep winter quiet around the old stones. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He was not wearing his crown. He looked without it like a man broad and tired, his jaw carrying 2 days of shadow, his dark eyes moving over the room until they found me. I closed the book on my lap, did not stand. Let him come into the room, let him sit in the chair across from me that Wen had used 3 days earlier. Let the silence be what it was. I don't have a speech, he said. Good, I said. I've heard your speeches. They're very good for empires. Something moved through his expression, not quite a smile but an acknowledgement. Lyra. Don't say my name like that, I said quietly. Like it's something you found after losing it. You did not lose me. You put me down on a shelf and expected me to stay there. He was quiet. I need you to understand something, I said. Not as your Luna, not as a political entity, not as a piece on your board. I need Aldrich, you, the person I bonded with in this empire, to understand that what you allowed was a humiliation designed to make me small in front of every person in this palace. And you wrote the order yourself. You didn't stumble into it. You chose it. I know, he said very quietly. I sat in a chair and I let them cut my mother's hair off my head, I said, because I thought, I don't know what I thought, that compliance was somehow still the thing that would reach you. I looked at him steadily. It reached you in the end, just not the way I planned. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, the same posture Wen had used but with something different in it, rawer, less composed. I told myself that the bond meant you were safe, he said. That as long as the bond held, as long as you were Luna in title, the rest was. The rest was mine to absorb, I said. Yes, I know. That is the thing you need to understand has to change. It will change. He looked up. Lyra, I am asking you, I am not negotiating. I am not offering terms. I am asking you to give me the chance to show you that I know what I failed to be. The council is going to require a public acknowledgement, I said. I'll give it. It will not be comfortable. I know. It will not restore anything on its own. I know that too. His eyes were steady now. The dark, direct quality I had fallen in love with, the thing I had spent 3 years watching him point everywhere except at me. I have not been present with you. I chose an easier thing when the harder thing was what I promised you. I don't have a reason that justifies it. I have only, I have been told by someone I trust that I am drowning and I don't know how to ask for help when I'm drowning, that I never have." He paused. "She told me that you have been trying to keep both of us above water for 3 years and I made you do it alone." Something shifted in my chest, old and deep, the bond stirring like a thing waking up rather than dying. "Who told you that?" I asked. "Elder Marin." Something like wry grief crossed his face. "She has very direct opinions about kings." "I like her," I said. "I know. She likes you considerably more than she likes me at present." The silence settled between us, different from the silences of recent years, not empty, not avoiding. Present. Two people in the same room for the first time in a long time. "I am not withdrawing the covenant process," I said finally. "The council will decide what it decides and you will meet whatever conditions they set publicly without negotiation. That is not flexible." "I understand." "And Serafina leaves the palace." I said it plainly, without heat. "Not because I need the victory of it, because I will not rebuild something in the same house where it was broken." He nodded once. "She will be gone by morning." "Aldrich," I waited until he was looking at me fully, "I am not promising you that I forgive this. I am saying that I have not yet decided this bond cannot be repaired. There is a difference. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes," he said. And then, after a pause, "The difference is that one is a gift I haven't earned and the other is a door that hasn't been closed." I looked at him for a long time. "Don't write your way out of this one," I said quietly. "Words are easy for you. I have heard beautiful words from you in this palace. I want the other things." "I know." He looked down at his hands, back up. "Can I ask you one thing?" I waited. "Your hair," he said. He looked like it cost him something to say it. "I am sorry. I am specifically, not generally, sorry for that. It was cruelty dressed as indifference and I knew what it meant and I gave the order anyway." He stopped. Started again. "I know there is nothing I can do about it now, but I need you to know that I know exactly what I took." I did not answer immediately. I reached up, almost involuntarily, and touched the ends of my shortened hair. My mother's hair, cut away and worn by another woman for one evening, and then, presumably, discarded when the wreath was dismantled. "It will grow," I said at last. "That's the thing about hair." Something crossed his face. Not relief, something more complicated, more honest than relief. "Yes," he said, "I suppose it will." The council delivered its judgment on the fourth day, in full session, with every lord and elder present, and the proceedings entered into the official record of the empire. Aldrich was required to stand before the assembled court and give public acknowledgement of dishonor, not a carefully worded political statement, but a plain accounting of what he had done. He did it without a shield. He stood at the front of the great hall, without his crown, and he said in the same voice that had once commanded armies that he had dishonored his mate, that he had treated the sacred bond as a convenience rather than a covenant, and that he accepted the council's authority to set conditions on its continuation. I sat at the high table and watched his face while he said it. He did not look at Serafina's empty seat. He did not look at the council. He looked at me. The conditions were 4. A formal rebonding ceremony within the month, conducted before the full court. 6 months of council oversight of palace affairs. A public restoration of the Luna's ceremonial authority, which had been quietly eroded over 3 years. An Elder Marin appointed as formal counselor to the Luna's office for the duration of the oversight period. When the herald read the 4th condition, Elder Marin, 70 years old and shaped like a winter root, made a sound that might have been satisfaction. Aldrich accepted all 4 without comment. He found me afterward in the corridor outside the hall, where I was standing with Lysa and 2 of the council representatives while the formal documents were prepared. The corridor was busy with the movement of the deliberation breaking up, and people were watching. They were always watching now. with the avid, careful attention of a court recalibrating itself around a new reality. He stopped a few feet from me, not close enough to presume. "Luna," he said. The title spoken plainly, with nothing ironic or transactional in it, just what I was. "Alpha King," I said. "I would like to walk with you," he said. "Not now if you prefer not, but today if you're willing, to the winter garden. We used to." He stopped. "I would like to begin again from the very small things." The winter garden, where we had walked in the first months of our courtship, wolves running ahead through snow, his hand finding mine on the way back. Lysa was watching me from the corner of her eye, with the enormous restraint of someone, very deliberately not expressing an opinion. "The very small things," I said. "Yes." I was quiet for a moment. The bond hummed in my chest, alive, present, waiting with more patience than I had credited it with. "Give me an hour," I said. "I have documents to review with Elder Marin." "Of course." "And Aldrich," I looked at him steadily. "Bring no agenda, no policy, no empire, no strategy, just come as yourself." He held my gaze. "I will try," he said. "I mean that, not as a promise, as a genuine attempt to remember how." It was, I thought, the most honest thing he had said to me in years. Not beautiful, not polished, just true. "An hour," I said again. And I turned back to Elder Marin, who was watching us both with ancient, unsentimental eyes. "Well," the elder said to me quietly, shuffling her documents, "not a disaster." "High praise from you," I said. "The highest I have," she said. "Now sit down, we have work to do." I want to tell you the hair grew back quickly, and everything was simple after that. I want to tell you that a man who spent years looking through you can simply choose to see you, and that alone is enough to repair what was broken. That would not be honest. It would be a kind of story, but not the kind that helps anyone. What I can tell you is this. The winter garden walk lasted 2 hours, not 1, and I did not end it early. Aldrich spoke very little for the first hour, and I did not fill the silence for him, which was a deliberate choice that cost me something old and habitual, that instinct to smooth and bridge and keep things moving so nothing got large enough to examine. I let the silence sit. He sat in it, and I could feel his discomfort with it, and that was correct. Some silences need to be uncomfortable before they can become something else. In the second hour he started talking, not about the empire, not about the council's decision or the political mathematics of the next weeks. He talked about his father, a specific morning, a specific room, specific light. 14 years old, and a lesson delivered in the flat instructional tone of a man passing on what he believed to be genuine wisdom. A king who lets anyone see what he needs has given them the means to break him. Aldrich had taken that lesson and built himself around it so completely that he had eventually applied it to everything, to the council, to the court, to me, to us, to the space between them where a marriage had once been growing and then quietly run out of room to breathe. I did not say I know. I had known it for years, and saying so would have been another form of the old habit. I said, "Tell me more about that morning," and he did, and then more. And by the time we came back through the garden gate, the light was failing, and his shoulder was close enough to mine that I could feel the warmth of him, and neither of us made it mean more than it was. It was small. It was the beginning of something I could not yet name. Two people choosing, against the accumulated weight of years and failures and damage, to stand in the same direction. The oversight period ran for 6 months. Elder Marin administered it with the brisk efficiency of someone who has been given a job they consider both important and overdue. The Luna's office was restored, reorganized, given back the formal standing that had been quietly eroded over years of Aldrich's careful administrative management. 3 ceremonial functions reinstated. A 47-page protocol document that Aldrich signed without attempting to alter a single provision, which Elder Marin called minimal progress with the tone of someone who had expected worse. He was different during those months. Not transformed. I want to be accurate here, because transformed is the word that easy stories use, and it has never done justice to what change actually looks like when it is real. He was imperfect and effortful and sometimes slipped back into the familiar distances, and on those evenings I did not chase him there or smooth it over. I let it be what it was, and I told him clearly what I had noticed, and he received it without defending it, which was itself a new thing. He was learning to stay in rooms rather than administrate them from a distance. It was slow. There were evenings when the slowness was difficult to sit with. There were also evenings in the library, his chair across from mine, the fire between us, neither of us requiring the other to be more or different than what they were in that specific hour. There were mornings in the chapel garden, the frozen gravel and our breath in the cold air, and the wolves running patterns that only wolves understand. There were small and unremarkable moments that added up over time to a life that was actually being inhabited rather than governed. My hair grew back. Lysa monitored its progress with a seriousness she attempted to conceal and mostly failed at. By the time it reached my shoulders, the oversight period had ended. Elder Marin filed her summary with the council, guardedly optimistic, in the formal language of the document, which meant more than the words conveyed if you knew her. Aldrich read it in his study, then he looked up at me across the desk. "Is guardedly optimistic sufficient?" he asked. "From her it is approximately the highest available commendation," I said. "Then I will take it." "You should," I said, "and then keep going." He looked at me for a moment, the dark eyes present not performing anything. "I intend to," he said. There was an evening that following winter when I was at my vanity, and my hair was past my shoulders and still growing, not yet where it had been but clearly on its way, and Aldrich came into the room without knocking the way he had started doing again somewhere in the months of the slow rebuilding. He stood behind me for a moment. Then he reached out carefully, the reaching of a man who has learned that things must be offered before they are taken, and that the offering itself is the thing, and worked his hands into my hair the way my mother used to do. No agenda, no performance, just there. His hands moving slowly through the growing length of it, the fire making everything warm, the palace outside doing whatever palaces do while the people inside them live their lives. I let him. I closed my eyes. Outside, the Northern Empire kept its enormous and unceasing business. The machinery of governance that does not stop for sentiment, that fed on time and attention without apology, all of it real and all of it continuing in the way the world continues regardless of what is happening inside one room on one winter evening. Delegations and council sessions, and the slow, patient work of maintaining an empire across difficult terrain. Inside that room there was only this, his hands in my hair, and the fire, and the quiet, and two people who had broken something important choosing, in this moment and in the next one, and in the thousand small moments that a life is actually made of, to keep showing up for each other. The moon goddess does not make mistakes. I believe this still, even knowing what I know now, even having lived through what I lived through. She made him. She made me. She put us in the same room and let the bond say what it said. What she does not do is finish the work for you. She puts the lamp in your chest and she says, "Here is the light." What you build around it, how you tend it through the seasons when it burns low, whether you protect the person standing in its warmth with you, that is yours. All of it. Made from every choice, every failure, everything you are willing to learn after you have gotten it terribly wrong. We were building, slowly, and with full knowledge of what the materials had cost us. The foundation we were making was not the original, it was something different, sturdier in the places that had broken. More honest about what it had to hold, fitted together with the particular care of people who understand, now, exactly how things can come apart. That is how lasting things are made, not by never cracking, by knowing the cracks and building around them with both hands carefully together. By the time my hair fell past my shoulders again and kept going, I had stopped measuring the distance between where it was and where it had been. I was paying attention to where I was. His hands in the firelight, the bond warm in my chest, the night outside the window and the empire beyond it, and all the ordinary, irreplaceable weight of a life being lived. That, in the end, is the only direction that matters. Not backward toward what was lost, forward into what is being made. We were making something. I intended to keep watch over it.